we'll have a video connection with Wayne Wang and hear some of his thoughts. As Heidi mentioned, I could take this off, I guess. As Heidi mentioned, Wayne Wang recently re-edited this picture, so it'd be interesting to hear some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I don't know. He's re-edited it a few times, actually.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can
so I will be asking that question too, as to exactly when he did this last one.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because I saw it a few years ago. Jean-Claude Carrière got a governor's award. I think it was like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And he had done some work on it then. And I think just with some of the protests and what was going on in Hong Kong, he decided to re-edit. And I feel like some of the stuff that you saw when Hong Kong's, I think the transfer of power was July 1st. So that when he cuts back to June and you're seeing more of the protests, I feel like that was added in. Like, I mean, it was there, but he put it in. There was also at the very end of the movie, you saw a credit that said, inspired by a short story called The Last Acts of the Madhouse by Rachel Ingalls, who's an American author who lived in England. And there was a whole story. At one point, it was a little bit in the movie, it never was in the movie completely, but Maggie Cheung's character, she talks about William in the movie, and that she was in love with William, and that this was a relationship that was not allowed to happen because William was British, and his family objected to her. And that was based on this short story by Rachel Ingalls, which happened in the United States, which was a classic story about class, a Romeo and Juliet story. And we thought that storyline really did connect to Hong Kong, where the British imperialists never, had a love affair with Asia in a way and with China. But again, it's this problem of imperialism and never complete acceptance.
Right.
But Jared Harris was in the movie for a minute, and he's not really in this cut. And that was kind of an interesting story because this is a case of casting and what happens sometimes with casting names. So I remember Johnny Depp was interested in playing that character. And he was going to play the character, and then he got a movie that he directed called The Brave.
Yeah. So
he couldn't do the movie, and suddenly we were a few weeks to shoot, and we had lost this. And it wasn't a huge storyline. The movie came together because Gong Li, Hong Kong,
right.
1997.
And this was her first English language film.
Yes, and the movie was literally put together on that basis. And when it was made, this could never again be made today this way. Like, that was enough to get a pretty large budget to make this movie. And then we had to come up with, well, what's the movie going to be about besides the changeover from Hong Kong? So that was the story. Paul Theroux is credited as one of the writers, and he had written a lot about Hong Kong, about a journalist in Hong Kong who falls in love with this Chinese woman. And then on top of it, there was this other story that I had read, which was a story published in Esquire magazine. It was called Faces of Madness at one time, the story by Rachel Ingalls. And I loved it. It was a really romantic story, and I thought it would be really interesting to have this relationship between somebody from Hong Kong and somebody from the British side. And so we started constructing this story around it. He then got Jean-Claude Carrière, who had written Discreet Charm of Bourgeoisie.
Right, major writer. Unbearable Lightness of Being, did a lot of work with Louis Buñuel.
Yeah.
Danton, probably the most significant European film writer of the last 50 years, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was a really interesting process because they really sat together in the room and we put together, like a Chinese box, all these layers of different stories. And it didn't all fit exactly. And the movie sort of has this way of weaving in and out. I was trying to remember watching it, like, why why was it? I love Ruben Blades in the movie. I think he brings such levity and warmth, and
he sort of grounds the film in a way.
Doesn't he?
Yeah.
And I can't remember why. I always really liked him, and I wanted to come up. This was not at the time when we were thinking about casting for diversity. This is something that he was an interesting guy to me, and I was like, I could imagine him as a photojournalist, and we brought all of these people in without a script, really.
Yes,
so
and it's worth noting, this film was shot in its natural sequence, which is very rare. This film was filmed from beginning to end, which is extremely rare and somewhat complicated because you have some locations here that you'd probably have to go back to then.
Yeah.
Which in most filming you don't want to do that. You want to shoot out the location completely and move on. But Wayne apparently really felt strongly about shooting it sequentially and even approaching it a little bit like a jazz piece
I think
of
that's
riffing and improvising as he went.
Yeah, jazz is a very good combination.
He also cites an influence of the Chris Marker film Sans Soleil. I don't know if anybody's seen that picture. Interesting French director who works in a quasi-experimental realm. La Jetée is his best-known film, but Sans Soleil, really interesting sort of meditation on place and situation and observation. And there's that element in here. Things happen, we watch it, we go to places, we hang out. It's less structured as a sequential, build, although it has the romantic centerpiece, which is quite interesting, I think.
Yeah.
And Jeremy Irons, I think, is fabulous to watch.
He's so interesting. And I remember when we met him and Wayne just started sort of describing what the movie could be, and he signed on to the movie without a script. Which was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And he let it happen and sort of developed that relationship with Gong Li. That was quite intense.
I don't know, has anybody seen Gong Li's other work, particularly for the Chinese director Zhang Yimou? If you haven't, I really recommend it. Judo,
Raise the Red
Lantern, the story of Kui Zhu. These movies are extraordinary, and she is just magnificent. This is her first English language. What a challenge for her.
It was a huge challenge. She hardly spoke English,
And so...
And she was also, I think, and this is something we could ask Wayne about, I think she also was worried politically about doing this movie. It was dangerous for her.
Because she's Chinese.
Yeah.
And she went back to China, and she's a major star in China. And Zhang Yimou had his own problems of having films that he made that were just extraordinary and really articulate thematically about China, from feudalism to the present, that the Chinese government would not allow to play at Cannes.
Yeah.
And so he had his own struggles. He then became a huge director of big action pageantry pictures in China, but those early films of Zhang Yimou are just extraordinary, and Gong Li was his muse, and internationally as important a star as there was at that point. But yes, politically she could face problems for that, because Zhang Yimou faced problems.
Yes, she was very nervous, I remember that.
Yeah. So, and this is something, I mean, I want to make sure that when Wayne comes on, we're ready for him, but...
will we see Wayne on the screen? Is that the idea?
Yes, that's the idea.
Okay.
I believe. And we'd like to hear some comments from the audience as well. I mean, it's a film that requires us as an audience to really go there and use some of our own imagination and find what we pull out of it, I think. And that's, to me, an interesting, satisfying, sometimes a little bit inexplicable experience. But I'd like to hear people's response to it. So let's hear from Wayne, and then talk a little bit further if people are interested. I mean, it's a film that has a visceral sensibility.
And I think that that's also very reflective, again, of Hong Kong. If you've been to Hong Kong, it's not a city that you just look at, it's a city that you feel. The Jeremy Irons apartment is, there's this big escalator that goes up to, and just that location itself, I remember it was a tiny apartment. It was very difficult to get the equipment in, to film in, to do that. But it's so much like he's living literally on the street almost, right? You feel it all the way.
There's that sense of the street, absolutely, and that it's so much larger than any individual. It is a sea of city, of humanity, of buildings, of place that is hard to imagine fully navigating or even getting your head around if you watch the film. I mean, you navigate the alleys and the stairways, and I think it gets that sense very interestingly.
And where Maggie Cheung's character lives in Kowloon, and Kowloon is even across the bay, even more teeming. Teeming is the word that comes, like everything is oozing out of Kowloon, from the markets to the sides, and you get that feeling, I think, in there. I actually was just watching the Student Academy Award films, like I'm on the committee for, and there's one about Kowloon. It's very interesting to see Kowloon up close like that again.
To me, there was a little bit of a feeling of Antonioni's blow up in this picture also.
Yeah.
The photographer character who is navigating a mysterious landscape, somewhat detached and sort of trying to find connection. And it's interesting, connection and disconnection is a theme that I sort of identified for this year's festival. And this film is about disconnection in significant ways. The way Blow Up is, and I think that even the way Sans Soleil, the Chris Marker film is, it's looking from the outside in and trying to find meaning in all of it. And I think we feel here with Jeremy Irons, first of all, with his diagnosis. I mean, the ultimate disconnection, but wanting to find meaning and connection. Yeah. And I think it's, rather than sort of building a literal narrative that explains all of that, we just see it happening. And that's sort of an interesting element to it, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And also the way that visually that Blow Up, I thought about again in terms of when they're looking at the imagery of Maggie Cheung in the apartment on the wall.
That's right.
And really just looking at the face and what that means differently.
And what's true and what's false, which also comes through in Blow Up.
Yeah.
And in terms of the film, it doesn't matter. It doesn't actually have to be answered, but it's posed. And again, I'd be curious to know, in terms of the story, for example, the role that Jean-Claude Carrier played, because he's worked with some fairly interesting narratives that go off the charts in some ways.
Yeah, we should definitely ask Wayne about the way that they collaborated. He was there for a while. There was a lot in that movie that's real, like the Russian prostitutes, like we found. Yeah. The doctor actually was my daughter's doctor.
Interesting.
She had an accident, they would call it nanny arm. Her arm got pulled out of her socket, and I went to the hospital and I met this doctor, and he was so amazing and calming with my daughter. We ended up casting him in the movie.
Interesting.
Wait, Wayne's calling me right now. Hold on. Wayne? Wayne?
Yeah. So, are you guys ready?
Yeah, we're ready. Yeah, we're here. Can
I'm waiting for a host to start the meeting.
I'll tell him. Can you start the meeting?
So then you do want me to go on my computer.
So we'd like to hear from you.
Some of your thoughts in re-editing the film, and also your thoughts now in 2021 about the film, about Hong Kong, and about how it relates to our thinking today, how it relates to your thinking today. Important to note that Wayne grew up in Hong Kong until he was 18 years old. So very personal stuff.
Okay. Well, I re-edited the film mostly because there was a lot of material, and I wanted to clear things out so that the through line becomes a little simpler. So that's one thing that I wanted to do. Two, I didn't want.
Go ahead.
So I also didn't want Jeremy Irons to be dying and sick to be too obvious in this new version. So I just kind of more implied it rather than made it too clear. That's two. And three, I had to kind of work around Gong Li a little bit because her English was not good. We tried to teach her English through the whole rehearsal period, during the shooting, and all of that, but it's difficult. So between those three reasons, I made certain cuts. I think the more important one is the first one, which is to clear things out so that the narrative kind of moves through a little smoother.
And so what are your thoughts today when thinking about the film and its meaning to you personally and how it relates to the current moment?
Well, every time I see the film and I see that section where, Hong Kong is turned over on the evening of 1997 at midnight, I kind of get really emotional anyway. Even though there was an agreement that, they would give Hong Kong their own autonomy and a certain set of democracy that has always been there, what the Chinese call one country, two system. But I just instinctively felt that something was not gonna be right. So, and that was 97, and everybody said that I was too cynical. I think the film kind of reflected that. But between 1997 and 2014, a lot of little things happened and they build up. In 2014, there was a umbrella movement, mostly of young students, where they felt that their autonomy and their democracy was slowly taken away, which was guaranteed by that basic law in 1997. So there were some thousands of students that gathered around the Central District, which is a big business area, and they kind of blocked everything for, I think, almost a month. After that, there were a lot of smaller incidences that lead up to basically a complete hundreds and thousands of Hong Kong people on the street protesting. And with the cops finally, shooting people that were unarmed, with the cops blinding a female journalist, with the cops kind of in cahoots with a group of gangsters beating up innocent people on the subway, and the jailing of many people that were, it would be pretty hard to prove that they were guilty of anything except maybe protesting for their own rights. Oftentimes they would be taken to court and the judge would even say, we don't know what we're going to charge you with yet, but you're going to stay in jail until we figure it out. So by this time, 2019 and 2020, basically China has rolled out a national security law that, without consultation of the Hong Kong people and the Hong Kong Legislative Council, basically took away everything. And in the last year or so, probably more than 100,000 people have immigrated to England and to Canada. And I'm in a position where I'm even afraid to go back to Hong Kong because they can do anything they want. That's sort of the bottom line of all of this. They can jail you. they can pass laws that go against anything that they agreed to before. So in that sense, I feel like the film was kind of pre-shadowing that. Even though there was nothing specific at that time that would give us, any indication of that, but I think, both the Jeremy Irons character and Raoul, I think both kind of brought that in their own, performances and their own improvisation.
I mean, there was a sense of the Jeremy Irons character of a kind of disconnectedness and trying to overcome that. I mean, did you see him representing the British presence in any way? And I would add to that a question about how you experienced the British presence yourself when you grew up in Hong Kong.
Well, let me answer myself first. I grew up in Hong Kong. It was pretty complicated because my parents were very strictly traditional Chinese. They were religious. They were Protestant. They were Baptist. I went to a Catholic school, a Catholic Jesuit school, and the city was run by the British. And I was very influenced by British TV, cinema, music, and also American ones too. So, but they really gave the people of Hong Kong pretty full freedom and for them to sort of decide what they wanted. And most of it was really about real estate and making money. As long as that was being given, I think relatively happy with the population in Hong Kong. And I was pretty happy there myself too until 1967, which was influenced by the Cultural Revolution in China. The Hong Kong left wing started protesting and planting bombs everywhere, which made it very difficult for the city. My parents at that time told me, you just have to leave, go to either England or America and go to school. So that's sort of my relationship to it, but I have no so-called ill feelings about how I grew up, even though it was complicated, even though it wasn't really my own culture, but I felt like at least I was free to be myself. So with Jeremy Irons, I think he, to me, represented the English. There were a lot of English and expats there. They were mostly journalists or working in the business world, and he was pretty much kind of a symbol of that. I didn't want to make it too obvious in that way because he's already English and he's there during '97, so it's all pretty laid out. There is that scene where there are other English and Americans there, which gives you a pretty good taste of all the expats that live there. And then, one of the things that Jean-Claude Carrière, who was the writer and screenwriter for the whole thing, he was also in Hong Kong at the time, and he really pushed for a love story more than anything else, rather than make everything directly political or symbolic, which is what we ended up, focusing on, which is, a love story between Jeremy Irons and Gong Li, which was not, something that could be completed. It could never be completed. And in a way, that's the relationship between the British and the Chinese, so to speak. So that became the focus of the film, and we tried to, and Heidi was there too, during the shooting, we had the script, but we were always making up what we were going to shoot at the beginning of the day. depending on what was going on in Hong Kong, whether it was protests, whether it was, whatever that was related to 97. But the problem was the Hong Kong government controlled it so well that nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. So we were sitting around in the morning, having nothing to really put our scenes in, so to speak. So that was one of the big problems of the film.
And Maggie Cheung's character, Jean, did she represent the sort of native Hong Kong sensibility as opposed to the Chinese sensibility?
Yeah, I think, the Gong Li character was always conceived as coming from China, and there's that whole scene where, some of the gangsters drinking at the bar, calling her the northern lady, and there were a lot of them slowly immigrating into China, into Hong Kong from China. And Maggie, I wanted to be more like a native Hong Kongese, who still has this kind of crazy energy of trying to make a living no matter how she does it. And I thought Maggie did a pretty good job. So basically Maggie said, I don't want a script, I don't want to know anything. You just tell me what you want of the character and I'll just do it. She got it right away. So it was a nice contrast between Maggie and Gong Li that way.
She feels connected to the place in a way that Gong Li does not. And
yes.
In a way, Gong Li feels disconnected almost in the same way that Jeremy Irons feels disconnected.
Right. In her own way, she feels really disconnected because she's married to somebody from Hong Kong probably for money and for more status reason, but she doesn't have true emotions and love and affection from that relationship. And she's still trying to find her footing in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And that's why Jeremy Irons sees this and wants her to go with him and leave Hong Kong, which is sort of the through line of the story.
You talked in an interview that I saw about Chris Marker's film Sans Soleil as somewhat of an inspiration. And of course, Sans Soleil is a poetic narrative, and I feel that there's a poetic quality to this narrative also.
I wish there was more. I love the kind of poetic quality and abstraction of Chris Marker's films, and that one in particular. And I wanted to try to bring more of that to this film, but there were a lot of pretty heavy-hitting investors involved. So we stuck to a good, strong narrative more than anything else.
Yeah. But there is this sense of the character navigating a landscape that is much larger than he is, but trying to sort of find his way through it. I was talking to Heidi earlier and also compared it some to Antonioni's Blow Up.
Mm-hmm.
Where,
I'm kind of a big fan of Antonioni in that sense. I mean, his main characters are always disassociated with what's around them. And this was the sense that we were working with quite a bit with the Jeremy Irons character.
Yes. I felt, like the David Hemmings character in Blow Up.
Mm-hmm.
He's navigating a world that he doesn't understand. There's a lot of mystery, and it's not clear what's true and what's false.
Right, and he's trying really hard to understand it, whether it's through his little camera or whether it's talking to Maggie. But I think the more he investigates it, the more confused he gets. Actually, there used to be a voiceover line where he actually says that, but I thought it was pretty obvious, so I took it out. Yeah.
Also, Wayne, I was saying that at one point, remember, we almost had Johnny Depp in the movie. And I felt like that's a situation where if that had come, that would have been another love story with Maggie Cheung. But then it didn't happen, and then it was like almost too many stories, so you pulled back on that as well. And that's something that happens when
yeah.
things evolve. Yeah.
Well, Heidi brought me, when she came to Hong Kong to keep casting and also sort of work on the film, she brought me a story, and I forget the name of it.
Faces of Madness, I think it was.
Yeah. And it was about, a young woman who falls in love with a, was it an English guy in the novel or no?
No, we transposed it. It was similar in that it was a class thing because the young woman was poor and the boy was from a really wealthy family, and they broke it up, and it was like a classic torn up love story that we could have transposed to the British William, that Jared Harris. So that's one question I had, is I feel like we had a piece of that in the movie at one point, but it's not in there now.
Yeah, the Jared Harris character was so unclear that I ended up cutting most of it out.
Yeah.
Because it didn't quite, it would have been another 15 minutes or another whole film there. So I kind of stayed with Maggie and why her face is the way it is and how she took poison to kill herself because of this English boy. And that's probably all we could handle. One of the things that I've learned over time, and this is, on hindsight, you look at something like Smoke, which is a short story, and it translated really well into a feature film. But to take a bigger story or two bigger stories and put them into a film, it's almost impossible. So that was one of the problems we were juggling. Not only, nothing happened in Hong Kong, we were juggling basically a double story. And I had Jean-Claude Carrière writing on set, and I also had Larry Gross writing on set. And Larry Gross was specifically writing the Maggie Cheung, and the English lover story. So here there was two different stories being written, but getting very complicated, whereas the real background of what's happening to Hong Kong was not happening. So that was the whole
story.
Yeah. But I thought we survived it pretty well, especially with my cut. I think, it's simple enough that you get everything. You don't have to spell too much out. And it kind of foreshadows what's happening in Hong Kong now.
Yeah.
Which is really, really sad. People can kind of look up Wikipedia and anywhere, CNN even website, and you can read a lot about it. And it's really, really sad what's going on.
There was an article 2 weeks ago in the New York Times Magazine about Taiwan, but it was about a student from, did you see it? It was the cover magazine article, about a student from Hong Kong who's trying to escape because of the pressures against him and the freedom. And he goes to Taiwan, and the Taiwan journalist is starting to get worried about, is Taiwan going to become a place of control in the same way?
Yeah, that's also happening quite a bit because a lot of Hong Kong people, it's easier for them to go to Taiwan because it is a Chinese place and at least they speak, Mandarin. But I think, there are so many of them going there that the people in Taiwan are becoming uncomfortable and suspicious also. And that's going to happen probably even in England too, to some degree. I mean, any kind of new immigrants to a country like Britain or Taiwan, they're all going to be suspicious and unhappy. So the local people, I mean. So it's a very difficult issue, and if you don't leave, then what's going to happen? It's really hard to say. There's a film director who made a film called 10 Years, which is now on Netflix, I think. And then he made another film which was shown in Cannes last minute, unannounced, which is actually about the whole protest that went on with the students between 2019 and 2020. So I think some distributor is going to, get that film and show it here.
Yeah, is there a question from the audience that you'd like to, yes?
I was confused about why Mona Lee left her husband, even though it seemed like he was fighting for her honor.
A person in the audience is saying that they're wondering about why Gong Li left her husband when her husband had defended her honor.
Because I think deep down inside, she didn't feel that he loved her, that he protected her out of a certain need at the time. Because I think her husband would lose face if he didn't do anything. He would be seen as a coward rather than truly being in love with her. That's what she felt, in my mind, with her character.
Anybody else have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious. I love the role-playing scene when it says about identity and vulnerability, and it was scripted that way predominantly, and how that came about.
The role-playing scene and what it shows about the character's vulnerability. Wondering whether it was scripted or something that was improvised on the set.
What do you mean the role-playing scene?
Lily, where she's with Lily and she's Jenny.
Vivian
Plays Jenny and
Oh.
goes to the, yeah.
That was all very specifically written. So that scene was kind of the core of a lot of the love story, and it was all written very, very, very carefully by Jean-Claude Carrier.
Beautiful scene.
Yeah.
By shooting in sequence, what advantages did you feel that you had?
I actually almost always shoot in sequence, even though it drives producers crazy. Because I really, this is just me, I really don't know what happens to a character from scene to scene. I know to a certain degree, but I don't know on a deeper level, on an emotional, psychological level, what they will do or not do. Especially with really good actors, I find that they give you so much from scene to scene, and if you don't shoot in sequence, you end up with either scenes that don't quite fit, or you have to reshoot them. You know, there's always, for example, in scheduling with studio movies, they always schedule, a very big emotional scene because they're difficult, and they schedule them really early on. And I always say, if you shoot it so early, we're going to have to shoot it all over again, because by the time they get to that real scene in their own character's emotions, they're completely different by then. And that's why I think, for me, I need to shoot in sequence, scene by scene. There might be some easy scenes that I don't have to do that with, but all the key emotional moments, I want to see them in front of me. I want to see them with my own eyes. I want to understand what the actors are going through and what they have given me before I go on to the next one.
So you use that process to inform the next scene and to pull out of the previous scene what you see happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how I work. And I work very emotionally that way with the actors. I mean, these days, if you're shooting a Marvel, big epic movie, you don't have to worry about that. They have to worry more about the technical special effects side of it. I make all these films that are really emotional between the characters, and I need to know exactly what they're going through, what they're ending up with in the scene, and where they're going next. It tells me a lot.
You've been very generous with your time, and I don't want to take up a lot of it. Maybe just if you would be willing to reflect a little bit on your work with Jeremy Irons, what you felt he brought, how you two communicated, any surprises that he was able to reveal to you that you found satisfying or effective.
He's such a great actor. I don't even know how to begin. He taught me so much. I mean, one of the things that he taught me was that the actor is not only kind of doing his character and doing the emotional, psychological stuff, he's very physical. And I have never seen an actor that is physically so well equipped and well trained. Whether it's his hands, whether it's riding a motorcycle, whether it's in a scene with another character, like the scene where he was kind of blanking out. The physicality of him is so amazing. And emotionally, he's also amazing because I've never worked with an actor where he gives you a different, slightly different, sometimes greater difference from take to take. He gets bored himself, I think, and he tries something else. And if you tell him something, then he'll really go out and try something different. And that's pretty rare. I would say 80% of good actors actually kind of stick to something and they try to make it work better. But Jeremy just kind of keeps twisting it and playing with it, and that's his power.
I think he has a lot of very rich subtext that expresses itself in the film, and it really it's a key for following through that's very nice.
And
the interesting, what? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that sometimes an actor like him, he grounded Gong Li. She was having a hard time. Like, I can't imagine not having him. Like, he became that guy.
Well, he basically, lived the character in Hong Kong. He literally lived it every day, every second. And he tried to seduce Gong Li during the shooting, which is partially probably personal and partially he was building his character with her. And that was really crucial. Otherwise, Gong Li would be even more kind of, not connected to the movie, so to speak. And I encouraged that because it really gave them something to work with. And Gong Li, outside of the script that she was practicing, does not speak a word of English, but they communicated really well.
It's funny. Well, anybody else have a question? All right, Wayne, you're very generous to have made this connection with us. We really appreciate it.
No, I really enjoyed it. And if anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to answer a couple more questions since we're here. I love Vermont. I was there once. And I loved it. I wanted to come back. Always wanted to come back, but never had a chance to. So,
well, let's do it.
Anyway.
We'll bring you here and show. We'll show Blue or Blue in the Face. We'll show Blue in the Face and Joy Luck Club.
Well, those are good films, but there's some. A museum in Philadelphia is restoring a film of mine called Life is Cheap, but Toilet Paper is Expensive. And they literally are restoring the whole thing from the film Negative. And that's a really interesting film. It's a very offensive film in many ways, but it's a really interesting film that's being restored, and maybe you can show that.
I remember our lunch in San Francisco in 1989.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I would remember it.
Did we have lunch with Mel Novikov? Is that what it was? Or
yes,
what was
San
your lunch?
Francisco Film Festival.
Yeah,
It's great.
okay. Now it's kind of coming back, Jay.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
There you go.
Thank you for our technical
Technology.
support. Let's give a hand to our